I'm the Heritage Interpretation Resources Manager, and the reason I'm here talking to you today is that I'll draw back to in 2021, Utah State Legislature named a new park called Utah Raptor State Park. What does that have to do with why we're all here? Well, besides having a world-famous dinosaur quarry on site, there is a former CCC camp, the Dalton Wells CCC camp, that was then repurposed into the Moab Citizen Isolation Center. So we have 46 state parks. Culturally focused of those are 12 state parks. We have 4 state monuments that are culturally focused, and then we have additional parks that have a cultural focus. But this new park will have a cultural focus. We are working, I help all 46 parks with their interpretation and their cultural preservation. We are having a handicap at this park in that there will be no interpretive staff on site to help with interpretation. So we have to make the exhibits be not just leave people with their feelings, but I'm trying to design it to give people a place to go. Like if you want to know further about this, here is another organization, here's a book, here's a video that you can consult, so that people we'll probably have some high school person on their summer break working at the gift shop, and they will not be equipped to handle all the emotions that are going to be brought up with our exhibits. So in March of 2021, that's when the park was designated. And it was in April 2021 that Claudia and then Utah Senator Janie Iwamoto went down on a tour with other legislators and dignitaries and special guests of the park site. And it was then that Senator Iwamoto, she was a sponsor of getting the park designated because she wanted the history of the Moab Citizen Isolation Center to be shared. And so my boss, I had cancer and was just headed into chemo when my boss said, hey, guess what you're going to do? You're going to be in charge of interpretation for this park. So at that time, I started working with Senator Iwamoto and assembling an advisory committee. And this is just to show you where the park is in case you've ever been to Arches and know where that is, or Moab. It's very close to Arches National Monument. So this is what the camp looked like. You saw that in Claudia's film earlier. This is the relation of the camp to the quarry. You can see up there's the dinosaur quarry on top of that banded formation. And this was in 1935, very soon after the camp was just built. And about 200 CCC enrollees went through every 6 months. So over the course of the 7 years it was open, let's see, 400 times 7 is 2,800 guys went through in the CCC. But anyway, given this assignment to do this interpretation, I said, this is not my specialty of expertise, and I am not going to commit the sin of about us without us. So I am going to assemble this advisory committee to help me. And of course, Senator Iwamoto and other legislators recommended people to be on it. So we had Senator Iwamoto, we had Claudia, Arthur Hansen, esteemed professor, helped set up the oral history archives that record much of this history of the incarceration at the concentration camps. And one of our newest additions, and someone I'm really excited about, in the last year joined Koji Lawazawa, whose grandparents were incarcerated at Gila, and he for his PhD, did an archaeological dig down at Gila in cooperation with our next speaker. So we've invited him on, and hopefully we are going to write some grants that will have archaeology of our site as well. So what I'm showing you today will be very preliminary exhibit ideas, not just a tiny portion of them. And then, but what I like to refer to as phase 1 exhibit designs, because fortunately we have a way to add to as we find more out. So we've had our content reviewed in development by Rosalind Tona, who was featured in that film, and Grant Din, and Dr. Duncan Williams, and Kurt Akita from up at Minidoka, and Rosemary Masters, who was the lead ranger out at Manzanar. We did a very preliminary of some of the research that our team has gathered. We did the Museum of Moab featured a temporary exhibit in conjunction with the traveling Smithsonian exhibit about the Moab Citizen Isolation Center. And there was an opening, and I went down for it to judge people's reactions to it, and it was very impactful, which is what we wanted. So that was great to be able to kind of put out and review. You don't often get that chance, so that was awesome. We have 8 people on the Utah State Park staff that are supporting the interpretation of the park. Chris Haramoto is our deputy director, and he was going to try and show today, but he's not. I was going to introduce him. Anyway, there's a bunch of us that are helping with the interpretation of this site. So I held my first advisory meeting November 2021, and it was there that we talked. It was a 2-hour meeting. We defined the parameters of research and gathered suggestions for interpretation themes, and I'd already started delving in. Very soon after that meeting, December 10th, I was, since I was in treatment, instead of contemplating my own mortality, I would cruise the internet late at night looking, putting in Google search terms. And so it was on December 10th in doing that, that popped up this very obscure video that had just been posted the day before on YouTube of a class out of the University of Maryland who had done a data crunching project of who all was at Moab, was one of the things, Moab and Leupp. And we, as a committee, it had been kind of talked about that there were only 39 people or 49 people at Moab. Reports varied. But this research project said there were 56 people held at the Moab Citizen Isolation Center. So I excitedly wrote, looking like, how can I get in touch? How can I get in touch? And between finding the professor's name that led this project, Dr. Marciano out of the University of Maryland, and contacting Densho, because I saw one of I think their executive director at the time, this was like 3 years ago, I said, hey, help me get this list of names, because I was screenshotting it late at night and it was fuzzy and it wasn't good. I need this Excel sheet. So they got it to me, which was awesome. Through additional research, I whittled away 2 names that actually weren't at Moab. So we end up with 54 men who were incarcerated at the Moab Isolation Center, Citizen Isolation Center, and there is the names of all of those 54 men. I'm just going to give you like 15 seconds to kind of absorb that. But these were the men that came out of first Manzanar, and then Gila, and then Tule, and then there was a second group of Manzanar. They were sent for various reasons that you just saw in Claudia's film. But anyway, I realized just very recently that this photo of the folks at Leupp in front of the eating place, the dining hall at Leupp, that this was taken in early May of 1943. And this was just after the transfer, April 27th, from Moab. So this is all of the people that were at our camp. So I don't think any additional ones had been sent yet. So this, we had lamented that we didn't have a photo of all of the men who were held. So this is revolutionary for me, that I can look at those faces, and we'll get a higher resolution copy of that for the exhibits. But that was really great. So about us without us, not about us without us, right? So I don't want to publish anything without descendant permission. So Oh, that has been such a challenge to try to track down descendants. It's an ongoing challenge. And it isn't that I just want to extract and take. That's not what this is about. This is not a smash and grab. We want to give back wherever we can to the descendants as well. And all of the descendants and all of you will be invited. We've set the grand opening for a special cultural exhibits opening for February 28th, 2025 at Utah Raptor State Park. And please take an invitation. Please take many. Share them with whoever. They're set up to be postcards or put in an envelope so you can write a personal message on them. But anyway, we want to share. We want people to be involved as much as they want. And I just wanted, if you're not a researcher, I just wanted to tell you what tracking down someone might mean. For me, it was looking up, Googling for census information and finding, looking at that picture when Joseph Kurihara's sister visited him in Japan in 1954 and looking at her last name and then looking back to try to find her and seeing that her name was totally spelled wrong and her husband's name and all the kids' name were spelled wrong, their last name, but tracking that down, finding her marriage certificate, looking generationally from the names listed in that census report in 1940 and finding the obituaries of other people going down generationally. Eventually, seeing going down now, not to the children. She was older than Joseph, but to the grandchildren and the grandnieces and nephews. And I saw one name, and just randomly Googling or whatever one night, that name popped up in Hawaii of a band leader in 1994 who'd been given an award. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is our guy. So I wrote to the high school of that band leader and said, hey, do you have the contact information? Or if you're not comfortable with giving me that contact information, will you give this person my contact information? I think I am writing about his great uncle for a museum exhibit that we're doing. And it's not a museum, but a visitor center exhibit that we're doing. And will you put him in contact with me? Well, they sent me his contact information. I wrote to him, and by gosh, he wrote me back, and he was so friendly, and he said, yes, we would love for you to share the information about Uncle Joe, as he called him, and you have permission to use photos and writings. And as you probably all know, Joseph Kurihara was prolific in his I've got copies of speeches and his autobiography and what he called his dissertation. So there's a lot to choose from for him, and some personal letters too. Then getting in contact with Masao Kawati's-san in Japan there was this Dear Mr. Collins documentary that was put out by a Japanese television station, which I ran across online, and they had a Japanese and English language version. And so I contacted the television station, the producers of the program, and they contacted Haruo Kawati, and he gave them permission to share his email. And he lives in Japan, and so we corresponded, and he gave me permission as well. He has written a book called No No Boy, which is not the same as the No No Boy one that's here, but it's entirely in Japanese. But I was able to buy a copy from their Japanese publisher, and am going through it first with Google Translate, not to say that's good, but just to try to isolate some passages where I can then direct someone who I will have who is a native speaker be able to actually do the beautiful translation. So anyway, going through that, but getting permission to use the information and the photos in that was great. And there's some pictures. What I love is the little boy making the face there is the son who wrote the book about his dad. That's post-war in Japan. Masao Kawati was a high school teacher before and after at Thule, before and after his incarceration at Moab and Leupp. But we have much more information about these folks, but I'm just kind of telling you how I track down descendants, and we will share, so I get to share. I want interpretation at our site not to be Justina's interpretation. So, of course, I have my board of advisors, but also I want it to be the people's words, their words themselves, as much as possible. So we have a small visitor center, and there'll be cultural exhibits and there'll be paleontological exhibits. I've got the theme of A Tale of Two Camps because we're also interpreting the CCC history at the same time. But boy, was it drastically different. And this is a mock-up of what you see right when you walk in. And you can see the groupings of a group of 15 of the people who were incarcerated at Moab, and then a group shot of some CCCers. But I think it's important. This will set the tone. This is the tone that I think is good to set. So here was the CCC experience at Dalton Wells CCC camp. I thought in 1940. I thought it was heaven. I thought it was wonderful. They wanted to give fellows something to do that couldn't find work. I actually dropped out of high school to join the CCC. I figured the $21 would help, which it did. The bonus was the better experience than I ever imagined I could have. It was a great thing for me. And then Joseph Kurihara, his quote, "It was an awful feeling, the first realization that my own government did not even consider me an American. It considered me a Japanese, and further a Japanese ready and willing to sell it out. You must remember, I had never been to Japan in my life. I am not a Japanese. I'm an American, and an American citizen, and I'm a veteran of 26 months overseas duty in the last war." And then this, in the translation from Google Slides to the PowerPoint, it messed it up. But anyway, I wanted the side-by-side comparison of Arthur Whitehead, American citizen, World War II veteran, photographer, music buff, and avid outdoorsman who was enrolled in the CCC camp in 1940. Joseph Kurihara, American citizen, World War I veteran, businessman, scholar, ship navigator, and activist incarcerated at Moab Citizen Isolation Center in 1943. So these experiences are separated by 3 years at this same place, but so different. So here's the first mock-up. Now, we've run into a little glitch in that my exhibits designer, who is wonderful, just got into an accident and destroyed her knee. And so she is in bed under heavy medication. But this was, we were working on Joseph Kurihara's display, and so this looks flat to you, and Claudia is always on me wanting the $1 million ideas. We have a good budget for state parks, but not $1 million of budgets. But this is not just posters on a wall, as Claudia has told us not to do. So wherever I can, we make it interactive. And this is a flat rendering, but what the rotating cube. So we wanted to represent facets of a life. So there will be what we call a plinth as a background, and then there will be a book on the front that you can turn pages of information. But then there's a rotating cube that's going to be like this tall, like this, that will have various, you turn it and you can see representations of a certain period of Joseph Kurihara's life. And it isn't just flat. There's little things you'll pick up or slide over or turn like this, doing the best we can, Claudia, with what we have. So anyway, that's we'll try to make it as engaging as possible for all of you. And so anyway, that's one. That's the mock-up. And her surgery isn't scheduled till October 1st, so we've got a lot of painkillers both before and after that. So I don't know how far we're going to get before. But I wanted to pull out some of the quotes that, and I'm not going to read them all for you, but maybe you can read them, that Joseph Kurihara and his dedication to the ideal of democracy, and knowing that if you love a country, you hold it to that standard of democracy, no matter what trouble it gets you in, is one of the themes that we're definitely going to run throughout. So all of his quotes about his love of democracy, and whenever that was threatened, or when his country let him down, we're going to go through that and put as many of those quotes in his own words about that as we can. So those are beautiful quotes. Please come to the opening and see it in action. Another person that you've already heard about too is Harry Ueno and but we're going to do a slightly different thing in that Rosemary Masters on her last day at Manzanar wrote, and she said, "Hey, did I ever forward you Yazo Ueno's diary?" And I said, "What? No, you did not forward me Yazo Ueno's diary." So during the time of their separation, after Harry was taken and incarcerated, he was jailed and he was incarcerated at various camps, he was writing her letters and she was writing letters back. I don't have those letters, but this journal that she wrote in daily, and I mean daily, gives me the rare opportunity of having a dialogue between this husband and wife separated during this time. And I'm basically sticking a love story in the middle of this horrible incarceration. So anyway, we have some photos. We have permission. Jody Lindbergh, Harry and Yazo's granddaughter, has given us permission to use their words and their images. So I thought I'd just treat you to a couple. So I'm going to put in this dialogue, and my graphic designer will somehow do it beautifully, but I want this to be interactive, back and forth. So here's an entry on the 23rd of February. She's noticing the peach blossoms. The peach blossoms are turning red. I waited all day for Yoshio's letter, but none came. I wonder if they won't let him write to me. Then just about a week later, or 10 days later, she said, I wrote to Yoshio and enclosed peach blossoms in a letter, in the letter. And then Harry, no date, but I know he's writing, this is a letter he sent her that was, it was typed out and kept in a government file, so that's why I have it. Thanks for the children's letters. Let them study Japanese. Give my regards to the neighbors. Don't work too hard and take good care of yourself. Thanks for the flower. We sent a letter telling about the truth of Manzanar incident to the Manzanar block representatives. However, they reported to the camp authority that we were threatening them. As a result, our letters are being inspected one by one. They are trying to make us suffer more and more. So just this dichotomy of the experiences in the different camp. Here's another one. Yoshi asked me to send him 3 nightgowns, so I went to the canteen and bought some material to sew them. In the afternoon, Mrs. Yamaguchi and Mrs. Suzukawa came to visit. Both ladies' husbands are detained at Moab, Utah. And then his responding letter, today I received all the goods which you sent. Thank you. I think the nightwears, and these are translated very clumsily, so I'm sure he means the nightgowns here, are just the right size. I gave the 2 persons each one. Thank you from them. We 4 are still segregated from the rest because he and Koichi Tsuji and a couple of other guys were very, very vocal about not working with camp authorities and not working for the camp too. So it got heated, and so they got put into a separate barracks. We 4 are still segregated from the rest, and except the mealtime, we are detained in the room all day long. However, since the room is large, they were in a barracks meant for 20, and there were 4 of them. We don't particularly feel inconvenienced. It is said that about 13 people are coming either today or tomorrow from Gila, Arizona. It means that other poor victims are to be added here. So again, the back and forth. Now, this was actually the first entry of her diary, but it bookends with what I'm going to read about Harry so beautifully. So it said, she says, it has been 3 months since Yoshio has been detained. It has been truly long days for me. When he was in Lone Pine Jail, I was happy. I had happy thoughts of his returning, but now he is at Moab, and I haven't any such hope now. Only his letters are my hope to continue to survive. So then Harry Ueno translated Yazo's diary, and at the very end, he put 2 of his own entries, and this was the very last one. He was waiting when they were finally reunited in Tule Lake. They arrived in Tule Lake in the evening. The following day, they finally arrived in my room just before noon. All of the baggages were opened and searched. Most of the written material was taken away, just like when I came to Tule Lake. Everything I wrote, all of the letters from Yazo were taken away and never returned to us. So what I hope we do with our exhibit is that we're returning a bit of this. So besides the visitor center, there is the historic site. Nothing hardly is left except some cracked cement pads, a few very low fragments of walls. We think the site was bulldozed. It was used as ranching land and other things, and public lands, jeep lands, camping lands for years. So there's not much left there. So trying to even reconstruct what the buildings were has been quite a task. But through various letters and lists of when they tried to sell off the buildings afterwards, I've tried to reconstruct what there was there and where it was there. Now this is very early on. There were some buildings added over time. We've done several surface archaeology. We've done, I think, 4 now, surface archaeological surveys. You're seeing here a few CCC remnants that are still there. It's very barren. But what we're going to do is we've laid down an interpretive trail around the historic site, and we will orient people with waysides of, these buildings used to be here. What you're looking at, these buildings used to be here. And there's one of them. I'll go to one that's more apropos for you folks. So we're having the guys in front of the barracks and the different, having quotes from their letters saying, the CCC camp is in this mountains. I'm not wearing glasses, but anyway, you can see that quote. And then there's a great one from Joseph Kurihara saying, the loathsome, uneventful life in an internment camp is more than an ordinary youngster can withstand. It takes tremendous willpower to bear the loathsomeness day after day, week after week, and month after month. And of course, he was 48 at the time. He was an older gentleman than most of the folks there, but it's a good quote. One of the things I did like that people, through their letters, you can see people reacted differently to life at Moab. And for instance, Joseph Kurihara was one that I enjoyed the rugged scenery of the surrounding hills and mountains over the once the home of prehistoric animals, whose bones we discovered as we roamed over the hills. There are several instances where they, it seems like, and I'm sure under guard, the guard percentage there was not quite 1-to-1 actually at Moab. It was a little bit under, more incarcerees than MPs and soldiers, but they probably went out with them to roam. They got to roam, so the animals he's talking about were dinosaurs. They were looking at dinosaur bones. And then Harry Ueno said, today Kurihara collected many tree fossils. There's lots of petrified wood, but he could have also found actual little trees of the ancient trees that used to be there. Tomorrow, a group of young men are going to leave to search for fossils. And this quote I love. I have not been able to find descendant permission, even reaching out, but perhaps we'll be able to. But there are so many queer stones and fossils which I am devotedly collecting. This is our best opportunity to learn, study, and to train the body and the mind. It is a picturesque scene when the sun sets and the sun rises in the vast expanse of the plateau. So some people were like, we're here, I'm going to make the best of what it is. Other people, there are heart-wrenching ones about how lonely I am, how I'm scared, why am I here? So we'll have those represented as well. This is just a tiny, 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 tiny bit of what we hope to offer. So if anyone is interested in coming to that special cultural exhibits opening on February 28th at the Utah Raptor State Park right outside of Moab, 14 miles, please do. The invitations are right there for you to take. And that's the end of my presentation.
Yat She Davina 2 bears Yanishya Tudachitni Nishle Tachitni Bashichin Tabahi Dashiche do Tudachitni Dashanele. I'm Navajo, originally from northern Arizona, and I just said my clans. We have 4 clans in our culture. We're supposed to introduce ourselves, our clans, to develop a kinship relationship with other Navajos who may be in the audience and may be related to me. So I'm Bitterwater clan, and I'm born for a Red Running Into the Water clan. My mother's side of the family is from a place called Sititwa. It's Bird Springs, which is right next door to Leupp, Arizona. So I grew up both on and off the Navajo reservation, and I've lived in Leupp, and I currently live in Tempe, Arizona, and I'm at Arizona State University. I just like to take this opportunity to say thank you for inviting me, and it's such an honor to be here learning about Japanese American history during World War II and what happened to innocent Japanese Americans by the U.S. government. And what happened actually affected the Navajo people as well. This picture here you see is of the Old Loop boarding school, and this was built in the 1920s. So this is the school that you see the men pictured sitting in front of, that was taken by Harry Ueno. And this building was, like I said, built in the 1920s, and there was a whole campus at Old Loop. So Loop is located on the southwestern part of the Navajo Reservation. Here's Flagstaff, Arizona. So it's about 45 miles east of Flagstaff on the Navajo Reservation on the corner. And it's adjacent to the Little Colorado River, which eventually flows into the Grand Canyon, into the Colorado River here. And so we're in Arizona, and here is Winslow, and my community of Birch Springs is here, and Loop is right here. So these are all the federal Indian boarding schools that were built on the Navajo Reservation in the early 20th century. And these places were meant to assimilate Native American children into Western society. And parents really didn't have a choice. They were forced to take their children to these boarding schools, or the authorities like policemen would come and pick up the children. And the way I learned about Loop is through my grandparents, who told me stories about when they were at school at the Old Loop boarding school. So it's called different names. It was called the Loop Agency School, it was called Loop Training School, Loop Boarding School, and then now most people refer to it as the Old Loop Boarding School. So there still is a Loop boarding school, but it's not existing on the same space anymore. The current Loop boarding school is also administered by the Navajo tribe, so they no longer have those outdated policies of assimilation. So, and there is an organization called the National Boarding School Healing Coalition that is collecting information about federal Indian boarding schools because of the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, has made that part of her administrative goals, is to find out more information about boarding schools in the United States because of the fact that unmarked graves are being found adjacent to these federal Indian boarding schools. So my grandparents, like I said, told me stories about when they were children, and my grandmother, she used to take care of my grandfather at Loop because she thought she was related to him, and he was small for his age. And she often told stories of being kind of like bullied by the older girls who would forcefully tattoo her. So she had all these tattoos on her hands, like symbols. And when I asked her where she got those, she said, I got them at the boarding school because the teenagers used to practice their tattooing skills on me, us little girls. And she also told me how when she was 5 years old, her parents used to hide her in their hogan, which is a round structure made out of wood and covered with earth or sand. And that's the traditional house for us. The door always faces east, and there's a earthen floor. She used to hide behind the sheepskins from the authorities, and then one day her relative told on her, the parents, and to the police, and so they threatened my great-grandfather and said, if you don't bring her to Leupp, you're gonna go to jail. So she was only 5 years old. And she also told me stories of when the Japanese were there in 1943. Well, not me, actually. She told my mom, and my mom told me. And my mom said that a lot of the Navajo peoples, they would see the Japanese men there playing basketball, playing baseball, and they didn't understand why, they were imprisoned behind this barbed wire fence and all these military men, because, they felt it was unfair. They felt sorry for the Japanese men that were imprisoned. They didn't understand, why they were there. And also, my grandmother used to make food and give the Japanese men food over the fence. And so you don't hear of these things in the literature. It's all oral history, and that's something that I'm very interested in. I was interested in studying the boarding school because this history has not been written about, the Navajo history of this federal Indian boarding school, even though it was one of the major governmental centers on the Navajo reservation in the early 1900s. So that's what I did for my dissertation. And in giving my presentation at the Leupp chapter, which is the local governmental entity, the Navajo people were asking me, especially the veterans, about the Leupp Isolation Center. They wanted to know more about the Leupp Isolation Center and the Japanese men that were imprisoned there. So that's when I started to think that I need to study the Navajo perspective of the Leupp Isolation Center. This is a map that I found for my dissertation in the National Archives in the Leupp files of the boarding school. And it was really interesting to find that there was Japanese incarceration archival material mixed in with the Leupp boarding school. And on this map, someone had drawn a fence. You can see the X's, and then in the corners, they put watchtower. So they put watchtower here, 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 and the fence goes like this. And then right here was another, I think it was somewhere on this side. So this is the whole campus of the old Leupp boarding school. There's nothing there now except 2 of the staff houses. And this was the first building that was built there in 1909. It was the original school, and it used to have everything: the dormitory, the school classrooms, and in the center there's a large courtyard, had an opening on the north and the south that a truck could drive through. Here is the school that was the first picture I showed you that was built in 1920. So they built this building and it became the school in 1920, and then they added a second floor into this building that was built in 1909, and this became the girls and boys dormitory, and the boys were on this half of the structure and the girls were on this half. And behind there was this building, the home economics, where the girls learned how to weave rugs, and the boys, they did a lot of carpentry in this small building. Here's the dining hall where that other photograph was taken of the Japanese men. They were all up here, that photograph. And then the other photograph in front of the school, they were sitting right here. And then here is the Leupp trading post that was opened that whole time. It opened in 1912 and it closed in 1982. So it was there during that whole time. Here's the hospital that was there, also built in the 1920s. The Presbyterian Church that was there since 1912 as well, that the Leupp boarding school students had to attend. This whole thing is about 125 square acres, and there's also a large earthen dike that is 8 feet high because this place was built in the flood zone of the Little Colorado River, and it was constantly being flooded. And so this affected the health of the children who were suffering from such diseases as tuberculosis. And the water there, when the Japanese men came, was also, they found sewage in the water while they were imprisoned there in like the kitchen, the dining hall. So here's an aerial view. Again, this was the main school building here, built in 1909, the school that was built in the 1920s. The dining hall was also built in like 1921. All these 3 buildings here were built in 1920, 1921. So here's the hospital, and then the trading post is here. And we also had a CCC camp to the north of the boarding school, and all these houses all around were the staff housing. And you can see here how close the Little Colorado River is right there. It used to flow this way, and then the channel changed in the 1920s, and that's when the worst flooding was, and now it flows to the west of the old Leupp boarding school site. There's nothing there now, so this is the original building, built in 1909. And this was in front of the original building was the clubhouse where a lot of the staff lived, the teachers. And this here is the back of the school building facing west. Here's the hospital. You can see how close the Little Colorado River is getting. This is the powerhouse that where coal was burned. The school closed in 1942, and there was a resolution that was passed, but the closure of the school, I think, mostly had to do with the fact that it kept flooding there, and also there were budget cuts in education from the Department of Interior and the Office of Indian Affairs, and that was one of the main reasons they closed Leupp in 1942. And in June of 1942, the Navajo Nation Tribal Council passed a resolution saying that the hereby invites the United States government to avail itself of the use of the above-mentioned Leupp properties for interning alien enemies or for any other purposes which will help our government in winning the war. So Len Horiichi also wrote an article about Leupp. It's very insightful, and a lot of the decisions about Leupp were not made with the Navajo people. This is the only document that refers to the Navajo people being involved. And it also says enemy aliens. It doesn't say Japanese American citizens or, American citizens. And a lot of the correspondence you find in the archives is of all the higher-ups who are all white men. The Secretary of the Interior, the Superintendent of Education was, white. So all these decisions were being made about Leupp, and they weren't really including, I haven't found any documentation where Navajo people were actively involved in the incarcerations of Japanese Americans at Leupp, other than this document. So that's one of the reasons that I really want to research more. And I've teamed up with my colleague, Koji, who was just mentioned, and also a historical archaeologist from Berkeley, June Sinceri, who's done a lot of work of community archaeology, working with indigenous peoples in California and New Mexico. They are both of Japanese descent, and we want to record the Leupp site and also look at the archival records, and also I want to interview Navajo people. So we started field work this summer in June, and we were out there at the Leupp site for 1 week, and we started to map the site, and we're trying to find people who can be on our committee, our advisory committee. Navajo people from the community, we talked to some who are interested in being on our advisory committee, and they have ideas like maybe establishing a memorial or some kind of park here. So we're looking forward to having more conversations with the Leupp community, and also members, Japanese American descendants who were imprisoned at Leupp. And these are just some of the archival records that we found, but there's so many more. And these pictures, both taken by Harry Weno, are in Burton et al. 2000, which was a report, Confinement and Ethnicity by the National Park Service. These are the numbers of Japanese Americans. About 70 men were imprisoned at Leupp, and 83, okay. Thank you. The stories that we've learned so far is that Raymond Best, Paul Robertson, I'm sorry, was a very nice individual, and one of the Navajo informants were talking to her grandmother used to work for him, and also he entrusted one of the men, Tom Tsuchida, to watch and babysit his kids while he was the director at Leupp, and he trusted him that much. Diane Tsuchida shared that with us, his granddaughter. So these are just some of the photographs that we took while we were out in the field. This is a sacred mountain to the Navajo people, and this is taken from the site of Old Leupp. And it was also painted in the Bitter Legacy. You saw the painting of this mountain. It's a very sacred place, and you can see it very clearly from the Old Leupp site. A picture on the left is the Little Colorado River, and then this is a bridge that was used in the early 20th century when the river was flowing. This is one of 2 remaining buildings at the Leupp site, and it gives you an idea of the sandstone, which was local. And there's a lot of debris out there, a lot of historical artifacts. There's remnants of the old sidewalks, and a lot of interesting architectural features still left on the ground. This is a map that we produced with our survey, and we're using drones to take photographs of all of this, and that's what we did this summer. And also we use a precise measuring instrument to locate all of these wall alignments. And then some of these dots refer to some of the artifacts we found. These are just a few of them. A lot of the artifacts, one of the major ones that we found was marbles. There was a lot of marbles all over. And up here is where the powerhouse used to be, and a lot of the mechanical parts of the powerhouse were found way down here. So it gives you an idea of how much the place has been, totally bulldozed in the 1960s, and a lot of the debris was put into the Little Colorado River to the east, or it was buried, according to some of the Navajo informants. This is a picture of the piece of sidewalk, and Koji is here. He used an MLED to measure or map all of the wall alignments, and we had to use these for the drone that my colleague June was mapping with. And here we were really surprised to find two of the foundations in the corner of where the fenced-in area, and I think this one might have been the northwest corner of the foundations of the watchtowers. There was about 150 military stationed here in 1943, and this Leupp Isolation Center was only open for 9 months, and everyone was gone by December 1943. And we found this U.S. Indian Service button as well. So those are just a couple of the artifacts that we found. This is our team. This is June's son. He wasn't out there, but June, Koji, me, and a student from ASU, Jade, we all were working there. And I wrote a book chapter with Hannah Marima, and we are going to be published in this book, Nature Unfurled, next month. So you can read our article about Leupp, or our book chapter, and then also Koji, June, and I are going to be presenting our research in October at the Japanese American Confinement Sites Consortium Education Conference in Los Angeles. So thank you very much. I think I went way over.
Well, when I was making a bitter legacy, I did about 4 or 5 trips to Leupp, and I've talked to. I mean, you'd have to, in order to find somebody, you have to talk to Aunt Sally over here, and then she would direct you, 5 miles. We did a lot of driving. I was with my son, who was my cameraman at Leupp. But essentially, what I did, we presented I did a screening of the film at the Leupp. What did you call the? What are the community centers called again? What are the community centers called?
Leupp chapter.
The chapter house. I showed the film at the chapter house, and we got an honor guard, presentation. They did that, and then should I go up there? And then, as I was showing the film, these 2 children were crying, and I said, "Oh my gosh, what's the matter?" I went up to them. He says, "That was Grandpa, and he had just passed away." That was when we were on the site. He was talking about the trading post. The Sunrise Trading Post, the Leupp Trading Post, was not, the owners of that trading post would not trade with the Japanese Americans. It was the other family that owned the Sunrise Trading Post. And they were the ones who would come in and offer supplies. And then one other thing I'd mention is the man who I interviewed, who was living in the former administrator's building. He told me that the government, all the other buildings were torn down, but they basically made it so that anybody could come in and claim that building. So his aunt did and said, "I want to buy that building." Well, she didn't have to buy it, they just gave it to her. And so he's since moved in and has fixed it up over the years. But he said he and his brother went in with the plow and tried to dig up, some of the property. And he has a row, if you go talk to him, because he has a whole area of artifacts that he's pulled up, and some of it was like just cologne bottles of the men and other things. But he said that, he did say that he did hear that they would, they brought all the papers and they put it down into the basements and, buried it too. But it was just a warm welcome to, by the Dene people there, so I want to thank them for that. And I have since gone back at my hard drives and found a lot of other footage I have of Loop, so I'll try to provide that to you as well. But I wanted to just mention that. Because I did 4 or 5 trips to Loop over the years and found it very, very, very interesting. But anyway, you want to?
Does anyone have any questions? Really?
So I guess this is for Davina. Like, as you're, kind of doing the research on Loop, we heard from Justina, they're going to be opening up an exhibit on this. What's next for Loop? What's coming up?
I think, we really would like to start interviewing the community of Loop, and because our goal is to produce educational products from our research, and so we want to also conduct interviews, and we're still forming our advisory committee to see what the community members want. And I'm mostly in charge of the Navajo interviews, and also and my other 2 teammates, we're going to also talk to, once we have our advisory committee formed. We have three members so far who said they agreed that they would be on our advisory committee, both our teachers. And so the other thing, we'll probably continue to do field work out there, possibly this fall, or but definitely next summer again. And we want to do a community day out at the site as well. So once we start talking to the community members, they can provide us more guidance. But some of the ideas is maybe producing a curriculum for kids, and also maybe some kind of developing an app maybe to take out there and to be able to walk around the site and use the app to find out information about the school while you're walking around at the site. And then one of the people that we had talked to, or 2 of the people that we asked to be on the advisory committee, they had always wanted something to be at Loop. One of them said he always wanted to develop a memorial there for the boarding school history and the Japanese isolation history. And then the other person, she's the one that said also she always wanted a park there for kids. And she's a retired teacher now, but she always would bring the local history into her classroom and talk about Loop, and take her her Navajo students out to the site as well. So those are some of the next steps that we would like to do at Loop.
Following up on what Davina said, because that reminded me, in working on a grant with Koji, I said, let's bring the school board into that, because we also want to develop curriculum. It's such an important part. And I should point out that this, although it looks obscure if you don't visit Moab, but Moab is so heavily visited, projected visitation to the site is between 500,000 and 1 million a year. So this story that is now relatively unknown is going to be known much more broadly. This is a park that will have intense visitation.
Well, maybe we do something on a similar, like 2 different stories, like the Navajo story and the Loop story. Because I have an interview of Peshlikai, Mr. Peshlikai, and he tells about being a child in the boarding school, and how whenever they would speak the Dene language, they'd hit him over the head with a ruler or something. They really were very cruel to them. and the methods they used to Americanize them. But he said it was really, absolutely horrible, conditions to be living in. And then the other family, that a couple that I interviewed, you see in the film, they have I think they might have other photographs of when Leupp was. You saw when there was a farmer's market. I went, oh my God, how wonderful! But I'm sure I tried to see if they had more photographs, and they were going to keep looking. So,
Yeah.
you know them.
No, I don't, but I'm real excited to get. The one thing that's really sad is that when I did my dissertation in 2016, I interviewed elders that actually went to school there, and I forgot to mention one of the elders that I talked to. Her name was Lucinda Machin, and she talked about how when she was younger, she remembers that they would have dinners with the Japanese prisoners. They would share food, and they would also play games. So I thought that was really interesting because, the policy was that the Navajo people were not to interact with the Japanese American prisoners. But another story is that the Japanese men, they learned how to say hello. So in Navajo, which is Yat-eh, so when Navajo families would be going to the Leupp trading posts, they would drive by, they had, have to drive by the school, and the Japanese American men would say Yat-eh to them. They would say hello. So this is like oral history that's not written down anywhere. And one of the sad things is that a lot of the people who were alive during that time, the elders that I interviewed, there's only 2 of them that are still alive, and it was really heartwarming for me to learn from the elders that I spoke with, the oral history they shared with me about their experience going to the boarding school. But it's just really sad now to know that they have passed away. So this, it's a really critical time right now. I mean, it has been, for like the past 20, 30 years, to make sure we get those stories recorded. So I probably will be mostly talking to the daughters or the grandsons or granddaughters of the Navajo people that were alive in 1943.
So I think has a question.
Okay, I'm not sure what the correct title is, but anyway, have Native Americans considered asking for reparations? Which I think you greatly deserve,
Oh, yes.
probably more than
Anybody.
lots of everybody else.
I think that we probably are fighting for. There's this whole movement called land back. So
Called what?
land back.
Land back. Yes.
But it's more of a philosophy. It's asking for reparations, or asking the government to, or whoever, to give the land back that was stolen, or demanding our rights. And so it can happen in many different. It could happen in many different ways. It could be, fighting for the environment. Like right now, my tribe is fighting for against the uranium mine that is adjacent to the Grand Canyon, because we have outlawed uranium mining on our reservation, because that happened in the 40s during the war. And they didn't tell the Navajo people that uranium, the radiation can cause cancer and kill you. And they didn't protect anyone that was working in those mines. They were just working in their, jeans and boots and shirts. And many Navajo people have cancer as a result of that, and we're suffering from that every generation. I've had so many of my relatives die of cancer. And so we're battling that uranium company that is insisting on mining uranium and transporting that through the Navajo reservation to Utah, where the only, uranium mine is adjacent to the Ute reservation there. So it's like, if they pollute the water near the Grand Canyon, that pollution's gonna go down into the Grand Canyon and affect the Havasupai that live in the Grand Canyon. But it's gonna keep going into the Colorado River and affect everyone who drinks from the Colorado River. So we are fighting these kind of battles constantly. So that land back philosophy is really strong right now. And so we're really still fighting to this day for things that were taken or injustices that were, happened to us. And I feel like the research we're doing at Leupp is part of that fight, because I don't want people to not know about what happened at the Leupp boarding school to Navajo kids or to Japanese Americans who were illegally incarcerated there. And I was recently at a PECOS conference, and this man, white archaeologist came up to me and started telling me, well, you should know that the men that were incarcerated at the Leupp Isolation Center were incorrigibles. And I was like, well, yeah, wouldn't you be upset if someone took your house and all your property and put you in jail for no reason? So I started arguing with him, and it just made me, really upset that he was trying to, mansplain to me, and, he was making it his priority to make sure that I knew that they were incorrigibles. So, these kinds of things just really, I think Native people have been living with these injustices, colonization, for very, decades, hundreds of years, and we are constantly doing our best to make changes for the better and fight for our rights.
A quick question, speaking of land, who owns the land at Leupp right now?
Well, it is tribal trust land, so it is on the Navajo reservation. But, even though it's technically tribal trust land, we are wards of the government. So, that was part of the reason why it was so easy for the government to establish federal Indian boarding schools on the Navajo reservation, as well as, incarcerate Japanese American citizens on the reservation.
Is it now illegal to have a boarding school on a Navajo reservation?
No, there are boarding schools that still exist in the United States, but the difference is now they're run by tribes, and they include, Navajo culture and language. So there's a lot of different kind of schools on the reservation, and boarding schools do still exist, but they're not run in the same manner like in the early 20th century.
I just said,
Really quick, last question.
two just comments. One is that when you said that the Japanese Americans were illegally incarcerated, well, I would say the same for the school children that had been there previously. And secondly, my sister and I, we were incarcerated on an Indian reservation. So, it just, they just use the same properties to do the same things. Yeah. We were at Poston, and there was the other one at Gila River.
Well, okay, I know we went way over, so thank you all for your patience. And let's give another round of applause to our awesome panel.